Next on the agenda is Roger. So going to give you some information on how Egg Farmers Canada functions and cost of production and that type of thing. So Roger, I'll let you take over.
Thank you. Good to see a good turnout here today. So I'm going to share some slides regarding Egg Farmers of Canada and some of our roles and responsibilities, cost of production, how it works, and how the amount of eggs is determined to meet the demand. So we'll start and go through the process, and at the end of each one, if there's any questions, by all means, please don't hesitate to ask. Or if there's a question even that comes to mind that has to do with anything about Egg Farmers of Canada that I may not be presenting on, please don't hesitate to ask. In my presentation today, I'm going to cover about our roles and responsibilities, quota allocation, I mentioned all that. So let's take a snapshot at today's industry. We're talking about Egg Farmers of Canada and the economic contribution that our egg industry gives. There's about $1.4 billion each year that is contributed to Canadian economy because of egg farmers across this country, and jobs of about 17,000 people from coast to coast. Like my farm, many farms in Canada are owned and operated by families who have been in the business for generations. Not only are the next generation taking over the family farm, many provinces are welcoming new entrants through specialized programs. Currently, 1 in 5 egg farms in Canada are new to the industry. And I think in Ontario, we have 2 new entrants each year. And at my table where I'm sitting today, I have 1 new entrant that's been in the business for a couple of years now, is Jim. He's here today, and it's good to see that he stays out of the barn and his wife is there to do the work, right, Jim? So all the farms in Canada are regulated and represented and work together through an Egg Farmers of Canada, which upholds the interests of Canadian egg farmers both nationally and internationally. Egg farms manage the supply of eggs. This helps make sure that consumers receive fresh, local, high-quality eggs and that farmers get a fair return based on what it costs to produce a dozen eggs. Egg Farmers of Canada also develops a national standards program like Start Clean, Stay Clean, and the Animal Care Program that support and improve the Canadian egg industry. It also invests in research and development on behalf of the industry with poultry science, egg production, animal and human nutrition, and environmental technologies and techniques. Represents the interests of regulated farmers on long-range issues with the federal government, which includes monitoring international trade negotiations. And for any of you young people in the room following TPP, that's a hot topic right now. And we'll wait and see how that unfolds regarding things that may or may not impact our egg industry. Also, Egg Farmers of Canada operates a marketing national campaign and education program. We do involvement with the Canadian Run for the Cure with CIBC and with Breakfast Clubs of Canada. Talked about that. So we'll get into calculating the cost of production. For more than 40 years, the system of supply management has benefited Canadian consumers and farmers, where consumers get fresh, local, and high-quality eggs, and farmers get a fair rate of return for their labor and investment. This makes it possible for continuously invest in our farms and drive innovation and support local economies. As Scott mentioned already, to work efficiently and effectively, supply management relies on 3 pillars: import controls, production planning, and producer pricing. When establishing producer pricing, egg boards across Canada refer to the cost of production, or the COP, as a benchmark to ensure the producer price considers farmers' costs, including a fair rate of return. The cost of producing a dozen marketable eggs is calculated by examining the expenses necessary for its production. This includes feed, layer, labor, operating costs, and capital investments like land and housing systems. First off, the planning. I happen to sit on the COP committee, vice chair of that committee, and we are in the beginning process of coming across with just the framework of that study. Harry's handing out some pamphlets, and Albert is also. These pamphlets were mailed to all egg producers in Canada. I cannot stress enough, if you as a farm are randomly selected to do the cost of production survey, please be involved. It is something that greatly will benefit you regarding the pricing of our eggs. Because if we don't get involvement regarding doing our cost of production survey, then what will become as a challenge is we'll have to come up with another method, which quote might be a model farm on how we do our pricing of eggs. This allows us with third-party auditor who will come to your farm, collect the information, all the data comes together to represent a reflective cost of producing eggs in Canada. I know Harry has mentioned that if you're randomly selected here in Ontario, you'll have the use of 50 more birds for 1 year for the amount of time and effort that you use also for putting into your information to the cost of production.
How about the strata? In terms of the size of farms that are as well?
Yeah, we're actually, the strata is between 10,000 and less than 100,000 regarding what is identified for doing a cost of production survey. And then all that information is gathered. Like Harry mentioned earlier, when your information is gathered from you, the auditor will collect that information. He will go back, put it together, and before it's brought to our COP committee, and when it comes to our COP committee, there's no names or anything attached. So only your information is identified to you. So what happens is he come back to make sure after he's left that day, or an email will come back and identifying to you, are these the costs that represent what you told me that day? And the best way to do that, I would say, is if you have a farm, I know I've been involved in it a couple times, is you sit down with your year-end from accountant, identify your costs, and it's pretty simple. It does take a little bit of time, but like I said, I can't stress enough how important it is to our system because it's really the basis for our pricing of our eggs. As much as Egg Farm of Canada collects that data, it's up to the provincial boards and the territory that does the pricing. So yeah, I jumped ahead a little bit there. Participants receive a detailed questionnaire to prepare for an in-person interview with a representative or an independent third-party organization who does not work for Egg Farmers of Canada but works on behalf of Egg Farmers of Canada. This helps safeguard our confidentiality of farmer participants. At no times participants' names or data specific to their farm operation are attached to the results. After the data is collected and validated, an analysis is performed to arrive at the COP results, the average representative cost to produce 1 dozen of marketable eggs. Once the COP results are approved and implemented, Egg Farmers of Canada monitor reports on a regular basis to measure fluctuations in various expenses to produce 1 dozen marketable eggs. The COP study results are then updated monthly to ensure they remain current, and egg boards refer to this updated COP result as a benchmark to establish producer pricing. So I'll make a mention there. Monthly, there is an update which reflects your major input costs, which is feed. So sometimes you'll see on your farm feed prices going up and you'll say, well, why aren't my egg prices going up yet, right? Because I'm already paying increased feed. There is a window that's captured as far as feed pricing that is a few weeks behind. And that's why sometimes when you have your price of eggs, you'll see, okay, now I'm getting increase of price of eggs. And not always when your feed prices go down, do your egg prices go down right away. The other factor we consider in Ontario regarding pricing is that retailers don't like a lot of fluctuations in egg pricing. So our goal is to try and be plus or minus above the COP at any given time within 1 cent, half a cent, so that at the end of the year or any 12-month rolling window, that producer can say that they've been made whole on their cost of production. So there might be a month or so where you're running a penny or two below, But as you move forward, there might be a month or two where you've run in a penny or two above. But at the end of the 12 months, wherever you move that sliding window, you should be able to look at your feed bill and say, okay, I can see feed prices went up, feed prices went down, and everything seems to be jiving. Talked about the importance of the process. I mentioned that. If you have really good detailed records, that helps with, when the auditor comes in. And if you've known anybody else who's had a survey questionnaire done, talk to them. Ask them if they found it difficult, or ask them things that they maybe learned from it. That would be helpful if you're randomly selected to participate in that. And like I said, to isolate ways about labor and operating costs, capital assets when you're purchasing equipment, new ventilation, new cages, all those types of things get identified. So that's the part on COP. Any questions on COP before I move forward to allocation? God, looks like everybody's looking like deer in the headlight. Okay, we'll talk about allocation. Allocation, in other words, is how many number of regulated dozen eggs produced across Canada is determined. So when we talk allocation, we talk hens. When we talk about allocation at Farmers of Canada, they recognize how many dozen eggs are required for the Canadian market. So we take the dozen of eggs required for the Canadian market and we divide that by 25.33 dozen, because the 25.33 dozen is the number of dozens identified in the cost of production. So the last cost of production identified that on average, there was 25.33 dozen marketable eggs. That's the important part, marketable. You're talking grade A eggs, not your undergrades, not your Bs, not your Cs, but marketable eggs. Some people say, oh, I had a great flock. They laid 27 dozen per bird. That may be the case, but what are your undergrades? We're talking what is your total marketable dozen eggs in the COP. So when we talk allocation, we're talking marketable eggs, because undergrades and cracks don't go to the consumers. Only grade A eggs do. Like the COP, this is also rooted in the pillars of supply management, the production planning pillars, and balancing the production of the eggs with Canadian egg market. To do this, as you know, a quota system is used. Quota allocation is typically reviewed by EFC Board of Directors on an annual basis to assess if amendments are required, but it can be reviewed by EFC at any time using their discretion, as long as they're following the criteria included in EFC's proclamation. So Harry made a mention, Egg Farmers of Ontario has opened the pool up, reopened the pool up for another amount of birds that are coming into the system. And this was basically made as a decision that last week at Egg Farmers of Canada meeting, there was another allocation request that's going forward to Farm Products Council of Canada in December for another 316,000 birds across this country. Each province is allocated hens based on some factors that I'll mention in a minute. But so that's why we've reopened it, because based on the amount of eggs coming in, we're falling behind. The Canadian market and demand for eggs is so strong that we're unable to keep up right now. So, rather than just going once a year, this year we have 2 asks that we're going to Farm Products Council of Canada. We did one in July that they approved. Now we're going for another ask in December. And in all likelihood, if everything works out right, we might be going and asking earlier next year instead of like September and November, where we typically go ask. Many aspects are evaluated and considered by the EFC board when it determines regulated quota allocation. Among other things, the criteria included in the proclamation and a quota allocation committee policy analysis, which is called the QAC policy. This is because quota allocation is done in accordance with an agreed upon methodology, which only can be changed if all provinces and Northwest Territories are in agreement with the change. QAC policy, a set of guidelines or a tool for the EFC Board of Directors to consider. At all times, the EFC Board has the discretion to allocate as long as it follows the proclamation criteria, but moving away from the QAC policy can result in challenges. The QAC policy analysis starts by the calculation of a national table disappearance of eggs to identify the changes in the number of eggs sold to the table market. So what we typically look at is the past 3 years' history. And there's where the gap is today, because we're always looking backwards. That's history facts we have. But over the last 7 years, egg production consumption and demand has actually grown by over 21%. So what we're seeing an increase far greater than what when we look back on the past 3 years. So we've even talked about how do we forward look and how do we meet those challenges. One of the data points included in this calculation is the production data reported by egg boards across the country. So the other factor is when we say there's so many number of dozen eggs being produced in the province, the last COP may have identified that the rate of lay is 25.33 dozen eggs. That was taken back in 2009 was when the last P came in place. But when our actual gradings come out, maybe it's showing it's a 24 dozen now. 26 dozen. So lots of those considerations have to be come into place. And I've talked about the 3 years disappearance. This number is converted from dozens of eggs, like I've talked about, to layers using the COP rate, which is 25.33 dozen. If the change in table disappearance is significant enough to warrant an allocation, the QAC policy distributes the allocated layers to each province and the Northwest Territories according to a 50-50 method. 50% is allocated based on a province's or territory's market share of layers for the previous year, and the other 50% is allocated then on a hen to population ratio from the previous year. Using the hen to population ratio enables short provinces, those that are below the national average, to be allocated additional quota based on the percentage required to reach the national average. So those provinces right now that are in, you would call the short province, is British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, and New Brunswick. And allocating based on market share allows provinces to meet provincial or territorial demand of shell eggs and local production. Table disappearance is an independent number of the layers allocated in the future. Should EFC allocate more birds, table disappearance will not change. Once EFC Board of Directors decides on quota regulations, which includes the allocated layers based on number of dozens, then Farm Product Council of Canada must approve the changes before they can be registered and implemented by EFC. These steps are essential to making sure that the pillars of supply management operate effectively and the system operates efficiently. Any questions on the allocation process? Chris?
Can you just repeat the 50-50 method one more? That method meet the requirements?
It is. It's a slow window. There is some challenges there because it's not meeting it as quick as we're seeing the population growth. And the main reason is because we're looking always at 3 years past data. Any other questions on allocation? No. Jim?
It's not on the allocation,
Okay.
but in regards to, I've heard that other provinces make more on a per bird than maybe what we do. Why is that?
I could barely hear you. Could you come up to the microphone, please?
Turn the mic on. Button on the side that says mute, just,
Oh, yeah. Watch. Yeah, watch.
Mic check, 1, 2.
Sorry, my question, I guess I probably should have asked it earlier when we were talking about COP, but I've heard that other provinces make more than what Ontario does after, say, feed and pullet. Why is that?
Well, that would go along with provincial pricing. And when you look at the COP, there is some regional costs took in place. But what I'll also say, there's provinces other than Ontario that make less return, quite a bit less. So the COP is a reflective cost of producing a dozen eggs, marketable eggs in Canada. And when you look at pricing in provinces, that's their jurisdiction. I know in Ontario, we really try and stick right to the COP because we believe that if you're going to be above it too much, then you're showing that you don't believe that that's true reflective cost. Or if you're below it too much, then it's not a true reflective cost. So in Ontario, we try and stick very, very close to the COP. Hubert?
I'll touch on that. The other thing in Ontario,
So the mic,
Yeah, so everybody can hear.
so in Ontario, we also have 7,000 birds, what we call EFP birds.
That's right.
Those eggs, those chickens, really, if we get our feed cost out of them and pullet costs, that's about it. And so, when I hear that question, you don't separate those two birds in the way of calculating your return per bird. But in reality, we have two kinds of birds in our barn. 8% is our 700,000 birds, and your 92% is our regular birds. Those birds deliver to the breakers every week 22,000 cases of eggs, which just cover your feed and your pullet cost, basically.
Yeah, that's true, Hubert. Good answer on that. Because there are some provinces that don't have EFP in their barns, and other provinces that do have EFP don't do it the way Ontario does. In Ontario, we feel that every producer should be supplying eggs for processing. That's what EFP is, and to be fair, then everybody's percentage of production is reflectively the same, 8%. So I don't have any other items to discuss today, so thank you for this time. If there's anything during the day at all, though, regarding Egg Farmers of Canada for the rest of the day or any time after this, please don't hesitate to ask me. Thank you.